the Edelman Trust Barometer, which for as long as I've been alive has been going through the floor every year in terms of people's trust in government, people in senior positions, companies. I can't think of a single piece of work that you could do that has the potential to have the sort of impact that employee advocacy done well can have for a brand.
Welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name is Lewis Gray. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at Disseminate. My co-host, as always, is Elliot Elsley, who sits within our Revenue Operations team. And our very special guest today is Stephen Brand. So, Stephen, firstly, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, nice to see you again, Lewis. Meet you for the first time, Elliot.
Absolute pleasure. Pleasure to have you on board. And Stephen, I'd say you've got a storied career and there's lots that we can go through today. So would you mind just introducing yourself, your role, your experience for our listeners, please?
Yeah, of course. And I'll move past the fact that storied career makes me just sound old. So I'm currently Global Employer Brand Lead for Rolls-Royce, where I've been since June of last year, helping set up and launch the first enterprise-wide employer brand for Rolls-Royce, which we brought to life at the end of January this year. And prior to that, yes, my storied career has included in-house roles at places like EY, Mambu, Deloitte, but also worked agency side, so I worked with Radency and TMP and agencies, and also a little bit of RPO with SourceRight, with Randstad, so I know a little bit about how the different points of the triangle sort of come together.
I guess the natural place to start is, why are you so passionate about employee advocacy as an essential part of employer branding today?
I think it must be for the last 8 or 10 years that every year, I think it's Hung Lee makes a big deal of it in Recruiting Brain Food. I think other sources do as well. The Edelman Trust Barometer, which for as long as I've been alive has been going through the floor every year in terms of people's trust in government, people in senior positions, companies. And so I think advocacy for a long time has felt like a way to build credibility, to build trust, to build connections with an audience for employer brand. I think it's pretty clear, not least because you're occasionally sharing the corporate LinkedIn or social agenda with your corporate comms colleagues. There's often a variety of messages up there elbowing for space. And employee advocacy has felt like one of those ways where we can directly connect our people and our messaging into a lot of the audience that we want to reach.
I guess, Stephen, from as part of that as well, are you seeing the landscape of advocacy kind of change from that perspective? You've been involved in it for such a long time. You know, I remember 7-8 years ago, the conversation around trust and why employees should be sharing was a really different conversation to now, where it's kind of an accepted fact at most businesses. And generally, 8 years ago, you were an early adopter. Now you're probably almost getting late to the party at that point.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think most organizations will probably have a program of some description up and running. And if they don't, what they will unwittingly have is probably a group of people advocating one way or another for the brand, whether it's officially or not. Because I think one of the big shifts that you will have seen and I've seen is the appreciation that we have as individual employees for what a LinkedIn, etc., can do for our careers, notwithstanding the fact we can get another job or connect with a recruiter on it, but how we can build our individual subject matter expertise, reputation profile, and the doors that can open, for example, to appear as a Luma on a podcast. But I think the door you have to push on in terms of people's interest and understanding for the benefits that social advocacy for themselves as an activity can have, I think is much easier. I think therefore it becomes about, why would I do it, and what is there a risk to my reputation as a sort of creator or as a poster of content that I'm seen as a corporate stooge or a patsy or whatever. So how do you offset that for me and give me confidence that you'll help me in what I'm trying to achieve if I'm going to help you? So I think that that two-way conversation's probably changed quite dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years, I would say.
And something that we spoke about at length during our first conversation, Stephen, was your plans to educate employees on the, the why of brand and the new employer brand that you've recently launched at Rolls-Royce. But before we come on to that, can you just tell us a little bit about that, the launch of the first enterprise level employer brand there?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, it's staggering. In fact, people keep saying it. I'm not entirely sure it can be true. We've been around too long. People are going to tap me on the shoulder and go, actually, I did the first one. But that's what I'm being told. I think Rolls-Royce, been around forever, is a massively well-known name. But there aren't many places, I would say, in the world you could go and Rolls-Royce won't have been heard of. But that's not, as we know, the same as understanding accurately what it is we do now. For example, when I got this role, lots of people reached out and told and asked what sort of a company car I got, and you have to have the conversation about the fact we don't make the cars, haven't made the cars for years. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and myth around what it is Rolls-Royce do, and therefore the kind of talent we bring into the organization. But I think in the last couple of years, and if you've seen the financial results and things recently, you know the dramatic turnaround that the leadership team have effected at the organization in the last couple of years. And that a big part of that has been looking to shift the culture internally and really focus on being a performance-driven culture. So, we would have had pockets in the organization where once you're in at Rolls-Royce, slippers on, can relax, I'm in the door now. They don't really get rid of people. It's absolutely fine. And that creates a certain type of culture that was stymieing the growth of the business. So changing that has meant changing sort of how we recruit, but also who we recruit. So that changes the story we need to take to the market. And the leadership team were also really key, that rather than being a business that over here we do some defense, here we build engines and we build in our silos and never the twain shall meet, is if you work for Rolls-Royce, you work for all of Rolls-Royce. We need to be able to move your skill set to where the customers need it. So you can't come in thinking, I'll work in civil because that's nice, but I don't really want to touch defense because I feel a bit icky about that. If you work for Rolls-Royce, you need to understand you work for Rolls-Royce and maybe deployed on any of the products that we support for clients, and you need to be comfortable with that. And it's absolutely fine if you're not, but that means that somebody has to tell you up front that that's the reality of working here, and that you can't pick and choose which particular engine you get to work on. We do, and you just need to know that while coming in. So I think there are a few factors there that just made the timing of sort of an enterprise brand right, in terms of thinking less as legacy Rolls-Royce and less as sort of bits of Rolls-Royce and more as we are a single sort of unified entity that you will come and join, and the opportunities come from the whole of Rolls-Royce, not just a little part of it.
Quick one. If you've ever wondered how your employee advocacy efforts are actually performing and not just what you think is happening, Disseminate offers a free employee advocacy health check. All you have to do is provide your company name, and our team will pull real social data on how active your employees are, what impact it's having, and then how you stack up against your chosen competitors. So whether you're assessing the performance of your employee advocacy program or getting a benchmark for a future program, these will be the insights you can act on. The link's in the show notes. And so, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit then about how you intend to bring in employee advocacy into this new employer brand launch? And also, if you can, why?
I've been convinced pretty much everywhere I've worked that we as an organization, our current workforce, already have connections to probably everybody we could ever want to hire, every specialism, skill set. Those connections already exist, but they are dormant the way a lot of our social connections are, a lot of our professional connections are dormant. But I think there's the opportunity to breathe some life into them with an advocacy program in a way that will never happen in corporate channel. I think most of our corporate LinkedIn is mostly where our current colleagues go to find news. But how is going to be where it's going to be small. So I think as I sort of mentioned, we'll look for 50 to 100, a cohort 50 to 100, and we'll run essentially a manual pilot process for the remainder of 2026, and it'll be ugly and it'll be a lot of manual reporting things, but we'll prove the business case. What I think now is more important that I haven't appreciated before is if I want an audience to feel really comfortable and confident expressing our brand through themselves, so to give them that spot of being able to talk about the things that we would like them to talk about, but in a voice that sounds like theirs and that they can connect to their own concerns and issues and themes, then they have to really know about the employer brand. And that's not a half an hour sort of introduction to advocacy slide deck that we take them through going, this is why we would like you to do it. Here is the EVP. Here are the pillars. Off you pop then. It's proper, dedicated learning about what an employer brand is and why companies have it. And when they're talking about these things, what do they mean? And how does having one in any way support business impact?
I think what's really good about doing that in that kind of format, and particularly, initial cohort, this is a starting block really for the business where there isn't something in place and this is pretty new. What you'll tend to find is the proliferation of that, the snowball effect that comes with the kind of more detailed training for that initial cohort and as you hire more people off the back of this, because actually you're going to have the attribution and you'll see in CVs, those people come into a slightly different culture as well, because they've heard about the brand through people talking about the brand. And in turn, they want to be more involved and talk about it. And these things can take a long time in big businesses, depending on how much jet fuel you kind of put in it, pardoning the kind of Rolls-Royce pun. But in doing that, it's a really, really powerful exercise that slowly gets bigger. And we've seen it with clients that have been with us for, a decade, where this is so ingrained in their culture, their employer brand. To your point, everybody truly understands it because they've basically joined the business as a part of it and as the reason that they've joined the business. And that's a really, really cool place to be.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. Something that's more sustainable, so it doesn't require the constant energy and sort of budget and resource to keep pushing it, because as you say, it develops its own momentum. But I think it also, then there's a clearer what's in it for me, and I get what's in it for the organization and why the organization would see a benefit, but the what's in it for me, I think, is an easier thing for people to see. So, and again, particularly if to start with, you lean into a cohort that's already active on LinkedIn, already building their network, already consciously engaging in sort of community building that way, they'll be the ones that are most protective about their own agenda and their own themes and topics and voice. And so if you can equip them to continue that, but just work with you on some of the topics, some of the stories, then I think it's a huge win. But they can only do that if they absolutely feel like they're not being asked to parrot, not being pushed or painted into a corner in terms of what they can talk about. They can talk about what they want, and they can understand how to connect it to brand pillars and the brand topic, because they get the brand and where it comes from and how embedded in the organization it is. I think historically, and I can only speak for myself, but I haven't probably done a good enough job at other organizations of really getting to the depth of the employer brand and where it comes from and how it connects to the organization and the benefits and those kind of bits, to really equip them people to be, advocates in our program, but also they don't need to be advocates in our program. It's conversations you're having in coffee shops. It's all of these kind of things that you're also doing off program. But if you know who we are and what we're about, then those conversations you're equipped to have are much more useful hopefully for you, but certainly for the person who's hearing them in terms of thinking about a career at Rolls-Royce.
Well, just on that point, Stephen, you mentioned the previous organizations you've worked at and just at large organizations in general, brand guardianship can be extremely tight, quite controlled. How does that kind of environment affect your ability to communicate the brand education piece? And then how does that affect employee advocacy?
So historically, it has quite a bit, where I think particularly in the professional services environment would be the most obvious one, where certainly for our emerging talent audiences, our younger audiences, you're pushing hard against some of the tone of voice and design principles often, because they are very, I'm trying to think of a better word than tedious, but can't, they're pretty, restrictive, pretty boring, and it's hard to then create that connection with an audience, and it's hard then to also convince young people keen on building their own voice and energy and sense of who they are on LinkedIn to fall into posts that have to obey that tone of voice, that corporate jargon, those kind of things. So I think it is pretty challenging, but I think I've always felt that if you know and understand the brand well enough, you can always find where the room to play is. There is always room to play. It's sometimes a little bit harder to find in the big established corporates than it is in the funky young upstarts, but there are still areas you can play. And I think, again, if at EY, for example, I had spent more time with those cohorts, really just helping them understand the brand and the tone of voice and the pillars and the themes, I think even there's room to play. There's room to have some fun with it. It's just, I think it seems more forbidding. It's certainly harder than in other places, and so it can be easy to put it off, or to not want to try, or to be concerned that you would say the wrong thing, write the wrong word, use the wrong color, and that could have a career impact. And that's just, I think, less of a concern at sort of small organizations, but certainly at the big ones, it's still a real concern. And so our job is to give people the confidence that you've got them, that you'll walk them through it, that you can help them with questions, that you can support them if they do something wrong, not start yelling at them, those kind of things. So it's tough, because brand is, there are rules, there are controls, there are guidelines, but there is also room. The English language is just, it's so big and vast and deep that you can absolutely abide by any written sense of sort of tone of voice guidelines and still have a lot of fun with the language you use. But the better you understand what the guidelines are and why they are what they are, the more, I think, you can play with them and you feel confident experimenting with them. I think, again, often our guidelines are, you can do this, you can't do this, but no, why can't I do that? What's wrong with that? Okay, right. Okay, I get the rules, the principles. Okay, now I can think, actually, I could use that, because I can use this. I can't use that word, but I could use this word. And you can have your you can personalize it and experiment with it a little bit there. I think that's probably been the challenge.
I think that's actually one of the really big sort of advantages of formalizing employee advocacy, employer brand, and like having a program to encourage people, particularly at these, larger organizations, or in my experience as well, more restrictive organizations that are really compliance heavy. Most people sit back and go, "Well, I just don't want to get anything wrong, so I'm not going to post on LinkedIn, because that would be a nightmare and I'll get told off." Whereas as soon as you go, "Here's a framework, here's something that you can kind of work from here," all of a sudden, all those people that have been kind of unsure but wanting to do it jump in, with both feet essentially, and it's a great place that people can kind of springboard from, and then you can start to, corral people as needed to make sure that they're in the right place.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's an element of it being official. So if you can get a senior sponsor or someone in, then again, that gives a little bit of confidence that you're not some rogue outfit that nobody's heard of, encouraging people to do awful things. So that really helps. But yeah, again, the guide rails you put in place, the governance you put in place, comms, we're thinking, how do we, for this cohort, how do we put them in touch with us? So we're there to triage with them whenever they want us to, but also how do we put them in touch with each other so they can bounce ideas and brainstorm themselves and not feel like it's all 50 of them, that they can only talk in single conversations to us as the central command. It's like, that's nonsense. They're a community. How can they talk to each other and share ideas? This worked well, what about this? So they kind of lean into each other and give each other confidence and support. So I think all of those bits, you're absolutely right, are really key to people wanting to, or enthusiastically wanting to get involved, and not feeling like, well, I'm doing it, but it's on pain of death, or because someone told me to, or because I feel I should, or because, it's in my performance review to support the business with a recruitment or something. But it's like, I want to do this. And that's the sort of, I think, well, we can all tell the posts that people write with enthusiasm, those they write under duress.
Well, on the performance and analysis side of things, Stephen, we spoke during our initial chat about selling this into leadership and helping them see it as a business advantage. And, we spoke just now about brand guardianship and all of these different bits and bobs. How do you get these people to stop seeing it as a loss of control and start seeing it as the business advantage that it is?
I think actually, depending on your leadership team, you can have a pretty robust conversation at the theory stage about what makes it different, what can make it effective as a means of spreading not just sort of accurate awareness of the employer brand, but also potentially putting a dotted line into sort of active hiring requirements. I think just running through the theory of the power of a personal connection, a personal story, and the effect that can have compared to engagement on corporate posts and corporate channels. I think there's a lot there just in terms of those raw numbers where I think a lot of people would nod their heads and go, that makes sense. That's not to say they still wouldn't want to see the numbers out back. So I think it's like, I think there's nothing better than just being able to work through some of the data that does come back from a program like that in terms of the additional reach that some of the content gets, some of the engagement that it gets, those reshares, those sort of meaningful engagements, if you like, so less the likes, but the comments, the things that start conversations, those kind of things, I think is where the real power is. There's an element of education around then what the data is showing you. I think just putting some numbers in front of leaders doesn't typically work. I think it needs the context of, if somebody's doing this, this is what it means. If somebody's taking the time to write a comment rather than just a like, that tells us something. If they're watching all of the video that's been shared, that's telling us something more than just them liking it. So giving them that detail, I think, is really key. I think there's also a lot of value in the feedback that comes from the advocates themselves, because I think, again, a big part of the employer brand is around internal engagement, both tracking it, supporting it, trying to drive it up. And I think a program like this that makes them really important parts of something the business is trying to do should, have a real impact on how they feel about the business they work for, their pride in it, their ambitions for it, those kind of things. And again, if you've got some strong performers as part of your cohort and the feedback is from them around the program is it's driving pride and ambition, and they're really keen to stay involved, or they want to refer some of their friends, then I think to business leaders that has a huge, they can start to see the material impact that the program potentially has for the organization. So I think there's a few ways that you can show pretty quickly that you're having the kind of impacts that you're looking to have. And once you've done that, hopefully the conversation around, imagine what we could do if, we scaled twice, 3 times, we had 10% of the population involved in this sort of activity. You can start to hypothesize if we got X number of engagements or comments with this many people, you can start to scale that. I think that then widens the eyes in terms of the potential impact that you could be having on the business.
Yeah, I think as with all things, and when it comes to particularly reporting up the chain of command and to C-suite board members, people like that are seeing this, anecdotal evidence tends to be really, really powerful from that perspective. As you say, that just the stories and just hey, X person said this many people reached out to them over LinkedIn, over a post that they created, or whatever it might be. Those little anecdotes really help cement it, because the numbers, unless you really kind of get into the weeds and about the numbers and you care about social metrics and what's good and what's bad, it's really difficult. It's just law of large numbers at that point, in my opinion. So I think having those anecdotes as that starting base to talk about is so much more impactful, particularly in the early stages pilot programs. I think it's a really good way to run at it.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think there's also then, that's the bit around getting back to, for the individual, supporting their development of their subject matter expertise, profile, reputation around specific topic areas. And that clearly has a benefit for that individual. But I think then the business can quickly start to see that if Rolls-Royce is starting to develop, individuals within Rolls-Royce are building sort of subject matter expertise profile in particular topics, then that's for the benefit of the organization they currently work for, i.e., Rolls-Royce.
Stephen, you mentioned previously that you wanted to start small with this. So towards the top of our conversation, if you were to build that first pilot group at Rolls-Royce tomorrow, you mentioned SMEs, people who are already active on social. Who would be within that group? Would it be those people within that cohort, or do you have other ideas in mind?
Yeah, I think I'd want people that certainly for a first cohort, partly to make it easier on myself while we're sort of learning how it will work. I think people that are familiar with the platform, with LinkedIn as the primary platform, people that will already, have shown interest in and an understanding of the impact that building personal renown or subject matter expertise can have. I think, again, just makes initial conversations easier. We have a group of 1,500 people across the organisation called Changemakers, whose job is, it's a sort of a voluntary position held for a year, to help land and embed sort of internal programs, culture changes, those kind of things internally. So just take them to team meetings and just be talking about them, help that dissemination across the organisation. So again, I think they would be a perfect cohort to go and start talking to, because again, we know in their minds, supporting the business, delivering communication aims is kind of something that's baked into their psyche already. So I think there's sort of groups there that we can lean into immediately, clearly expanding that over time. But I think just for the purposes of that pilot program, taking away some of the, making it slightly easier, I think makes sense, not least because it sort of will improve our speed to the start line, which I think is going to be really key. We're going to use 2026 to run the pilot, 2027 to ideally scale, and also potentially have decided and onboarded, do we need a partner, a platform to help us run it? So it's pretty ambitious to get all of that done and leave yourself enough time to actually demonstrate whether the pilot's delivered what you expected it to. So I think there's those bits. I think the other thing that we're just sort of going back and forth on is the involvement of leadership, and whether leaders as part of the cohort are vital as, again, you look up to them, behavior cascades down, etc. Do we need them in there versus do we just need sponsorship, visible sponsorship of the program from that leadership cohort? Is that sufficient? Because clearly the more senior people get, the more complexity there is around their social profile, what they say in public, all of those kind of things, which doesn't make for always the most agile of advocacy programs, and you've got sort of 25 layers of approval to go through. But equally, there is a weight to having their presence out there on behalf of the employer brand, certainly rather than the corporate brand, which would be helpful. But also, I think the gravitas and cachet that gives to the program internally, the prestige and the ease with which we could then recruit internally, I think would go up. So it's just that bit I'm not, I wake up one morning and I'm certain I want to go one way, the next I think I want to go the other. So yeah, that's the unknown, I think, is sort of what the role of leaders should be in certainly this pilot phase.
I think leaders are it's a really interesting question, particularly when your first foray within the business is a factor, because the long and the short from my perspective is senior leaders involved in this is categorically a good thing and will have all the benefits that you've just kind of outlined. The challenge is when you're just first rolling it out, sometimes there are teething issues and process and manual things that actually it can be better to bring the senior leadership in 2-3 months later to actually be operationally involved in it, because then you've worked all of these kind of little niggly parts out that you just want to make sure kind of are clean, essentially. That tends to be one of the hiccup points, I think, for a lot of people that are onboarding senior leaders into a program that's never existed before, is they haven't ironed out all of those wrinkles yet. And without that, then senior leaders are a bit off-put by it, and perhaps it's harder to re-engage them after the fact.
Yeah.
So it is a balancing act, and it depends how clean your process is. But the sooner the better, is my opinion.
Well, I've just got one final question for you, Stephen, and I think I'm not going to say storied career. I'm going to say, given your wealth of experience managing employee advocacy programs, you might be one of the best people to answer this question. And that is just, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to anybody looking to launch an employee advocacy program this year?
Beyond the fact that it'll probably be the best thing that you do for the thing you're working on. I can't think of a single piece of work that you could do that has the potential to have the sort of impact that employee advocacy done well can have for a brand. And I think that's true whether it's employee advocacy or sort of more customer marketing. I think harnessing the voice and the connections of your workforce to take an authentic, credible, believable, interesting message to all of the audience, customers, applicants, whatever it's all there, it's all possible. Every company's the same as we are, which is you probably already know all the people you want to hire and all the people you want to sell to. You're already connected to them. You don't need to invest money necessarily in the programs and systems and people to make those connections. They exist. It's about how do you enable them? How do you bring those dormant connections to life? So I think a piece of advice is, if you've got it in your mind, absolutely do it, and do it first. Put it right at the top of the list. But I guess then the second one is to don't feel like, and that's the same with a lot of things that we do. Don't feel like you need to have all the answers and everything needs to be perfect to launch it. Get to a position where you can, whether it's MVP or pilot or however you frame it. But I think it makes sense in a lot of cases to start small, get to a position where you can launch something, because I think the theory is compelling, but not as compelling as when you add the theory to a little bit of data. And it might be from 5 people for 2 months and the difference that made, because then you can start to do the maths. And I think you just need some data there to start doing the maths too, because I think like I say, the theory of all of our colleagues, all of their connections, the total audience is always eye-opening when you can do that maths and people realise who you've got potential access to once you can drop in a little bit. And this is what we've seen just from this cohort of 10, 20, 50, 100. Then I think that becomes incredibly powerful. So yes, so absolutely do it, and do it first. You don't have to have a massive cohort. You don't have to have all these things. You might decide it's right for you, and that's fine. But I think there are things you can do and go, we'll get to that, but I'm not going to let it delay proving the concept. I'm not going to let it delay testing the idea. We can do that in parallel.
No, I couldn't agree more. And in particular, in regards to having a partner, having a technology, those things come very naturally. I think with most businesses where you just reach an impasse where you go, this doesn't get bigger or faster or better without something in place to assist us in doing that. And that's a really natural point to then go and look for a partner. You can absolutely start with us as well, using a piece of technology, and that works just as well. But to your point, you can play test this internally without spending money and budget. And particularly if you're trying to build a business case and you're trying to build use case within your business for why you need to do this, do it manually. Just speak to 5 people, 10 people, just get some stats, get some attribution, and then the business case just builds itself, to your point.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's difference in the platforms and technology. It gives you an idea of learning for your organization. What are your pain points in making it happen? Might be the logistics and organization, might be the creating of content, might be the measurement. And you can then start to get a feel for, well, what do I need a partner to help me solve? And then go and get a partner that's absolutely the right sort of fit for you and what you're trying to solve. So yeah, there's no right, no wrong way. So don't let anything, don't let it hold you up.
All food for thought, and a fantastic way to finish the episode. So I would encourage everybody listening to go follow the work that Stephen's doing on LinkedIn. Check out the work that he's done with the launch of the new employer brand at Rolls-Royce, Infinite Potential. And Stephen, I guess the last thing to say is just thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, thanks both for inviting me. As I said to you at the start, I find these interesting because I learn as I go through and you bounce ideas around. I just find this a really interesting way, not just to share what I've done, but also to kick ideas around. So appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. And thank you everybody for listening. We'll catch you in a week's time.